Book discussion, The Laws of Thought by Tom Griffiths. This is a book about the history of cognitive science, or about the quest of humans to understand their own thinking and how thinking actually works. Goes back to sort of the Enlightenment, people like Leibniz, Descartes, and Boole a bit later in the 19th century, and then Turing, and then sort of more the modern thinkers. Now, it does capture some of the AI personalities like Geoffrey Hinton, because they were at the crossroads. This is a book about psychology. So this is really a book about the way humans think, not about the way artificial intelligence works, or machine learning engineering works, or large language models work, or any of that stuff. Now there's, of course, tangential comments and ideas and references that Tom makes, but this is a book about cognitive science, and in that sense it's a very good book, because it gives you a good overview over the history. The other way I would think about this, though, it's actually also exactly, in my opinion, a good waypoint in what not to do, because and Tom actually ends the book with that comment, right? Because what we're doing as a society, particularly the companies that are investing billions of dollars in artificial intelligence, they are not trying to recreate the human mind. This is a bit like the analogy of flight. Like, we were obsessed with how birds fly, but then we've built flying machines that are a lot more potent and powerful than birds when it comes to flying. Now they might not be able to do other things that birds can do, but the idea that we are influenced by biology and then recreate biology, that is not a good idea. And by the way, Tom is not necessarily recommending that. I'm just putting that out as a sort of idea also for people that are interested. If you're interested in how humans think, then cognitive science is the field for you. If you're interested in intelligence, I don't think that cognitive science is the right way to approach it, because even the title of the book itself, The Laws of Thought, actually already tells you that Tom is asking the wrong question. If the answer is, if you're interested in intelligence, as defined by John McCarthy, which is the computational part of the ability to achieve goals, if that's your interest, then you don't need to think about thought, because thought, the way we understand it's a very anthropomorphized way of thinking about intelligence, and even for humans, thought itself, meaning what we're actually doing with our brain, is potentially a very small part of how we think, because we have other sensors and organs such as the skin and muscles, and we store information in our muscles, for example, which is part of the idea of doing yoga and releasing that and sort of relaxing and things like that. So my point is, like, the thinking that we call thinking as humans might be a very different type of thinking the cognitive scientists think about. But nevertheless, of course, that's for another conversation. I think the book is very useful, because it gives you the overview over one particular branch of science, which is cognitive science, and how that branch has actually taught us quite a bit of interesting ideas in terms of building engineering machines that can eventually build intelligence at a much larger scale. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's February 18, 2026. This is Krim Delco. For the year, we're down 7%. The market's flat. We're underperforming by 7%. So, book discussion, Tom Griffiths, The Laws of Thought. For new listeners, maybe just real quick, why are we doing book discussions here? The purpose of the Not Even Wrong podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So why do we talk about books? And by the way, we talk about books in general. So this is not just, in this case, you could actually draw the line pretty quickly, because we have all our assets invested in artificial intelligence. So understanding cognitive science per se is not a bad idea, but that's not the point. The point is that book reading is yoga for the mind. It's not just pastime for a hedge fund manager, it is part of the business. We've said that many times. Go back, there's many episodes where we talk about this, but maybe just as a summary here, the reason it's very interesting actually to read books is maybe also to lean on cognitive science. It's to rewire our neurons, it's to add to our knowledge maybe different ways of thinking about things. Like often knowledge is not just created by adding new information into your memory bank, but also rearranging that information. In other words, finding new techniques to think about something. For example, Terence Tao recently gave a presentation about mathematics, and he said something interesting. He said finding a proof in mathematics is often not just the proof itself, which counts, but also the techniques that led to finding that proof. And I think this is an interesting comment. You could extrapolate this to any other knowledge type work where finding the solution, solving a problem is just part of the game. Also developing the techniques that get you to solve the problem could be an interesting thought. So back to Tom Griffiths' book, I think the laws of thought, again, we're not necessarily interested in thought. We're interested in intelligence, which is the computational part of achieving goals, and that is thought is part of it, but not necessarily the whole picture, maybe even very small picture. But let's just talk about the book for a second, and then I'll give you my impressions and sort of what I took from it. First, I think it's a very good book, so I recommend the reading of the book for several reasons. One is if you're interested in cognitive science. Sorry, there's some noise here. If you're interested in cognitive science, then of course it's a history of cognitive science. If you're interested in artificial intelligence, I think it's a great book to give you a bit of a sense also for where you stand, and I think you can draw the picture of where science actually is going and where artificial intelligence is going. Just to maybe to double click on that, I think we are at the crossroads now of de-anthropomorphizing intelligence and turning intelligence into an industrial scale endeavor because machines that are built on the kinds of intelligence that we're building now, inspired by transformers, are machines that have the ability to create a very, very large number of hypotheses about the world, and then once they're in inference, you use those hypotheses to infer the right action, whether it's finding the right answer to a question, or in the future touching something the right way, or fixing something, or flying somewhere, or cleaning something, and stuff like that. So this industrial scale intelligence, which is gigantic models that have many, many, many ways to represent the world and to infer what to do at the right time given a certain input. That kind of industrial scale intelligence will make our biological intelligence look very small. Now, we are very powerful in many ways. In particular, we're very, very powerful in understanding what we humans actually need for ourselves. I think we're very good at that, and it's gonna, in principle, of course, machines can at some point mimic what humans need, but that's gonna take a long time. So for a while at least, we have this edge, which is, and we just wrote an essay about this, inspired by the book, where we think that humans will become the sort of the shepherds of capital, and capital being AI labor, in terms of driving the AI armies towards goals that are useful for humans, of course defined by usefulness defined by the marketplace and things like that, traditional economics. But again, we need to understand how to set goals, which is the main contribution that humans will have in the future. Now, back to the book again. So the book has sort of three big sections. One is deductive logic, then one is inference through Bayesian inference, and then the neural nets, which kind of combine both of these things and use probabilistic inference towards achieving goals. And I want to rephrase that a little bit, but let me just go through the book and then I'll rephrase the last part, because I kind of have my own hat there, my economics hat from way back, which I think is very useful here. So let's start with logic. Logic is defining truths and then creating even more truths or new truths from those truths. That's what logic is. So we start with something, some sort of set of axioms, and then we decide what is true and what isn't. Now that, Kurt Gödel has shown us that is a hermetically closed system in itself, so that cannot prove, let's say, absolute truths in nature. It cannot get us to any kind of absolute truth, but it's good enough for hermetically sealed truths such as mathematics, a lot of engineering. We can build a Golden Gate Bridge without potentially questioning the axioms underlying Newtonian mechanics. It seems to work pretty well. And we can also build good communication networks without questioning the axioms of Maxwell's equations or Claude Shannon's information theory. So we can cut corners when it comes to understanding logically derived systems, engineered systems based on logic. So logic is good, but it of course has limits. It has limits, particularly when it comes to intelligence. Again, we're using John McCarthy's definition here, so the computational part of their ability to achieve goals. In that sense, logic fails because the goals are driven by nature, whether it's real-world AI or even just digital AI, understanding language, for example, solving math problems. The actual world is fuzzy. There's contradictions in the actual world, like Bertrand Russell famously formulated the most contradicting sentence of all, which is, this statement is a lie. And having said that, you're kind of already throwing logic, or at least you're throwing a pretty difficult curveball towards logic. Now, I've written an essay a while ago. Actually, I never published it because it was also part of something else, but that's not important. I actually, the idea of the essay was that contradictions are it's actually a very human ability to deal with contradictions. Like, we're very good at that, and it's interesting how I just read a recent biography by Thomas Jefferson, and he was a very contradicting personality because, let's say, he wrote the Declaration of Independence, which famously starts with all men are equal, but then he owned slaves. He was a big proponent of living in nature and being a farmer, but then he cherished the big city and all the life that it brings. So this type of contradiction is very human. A machine has very hard time being like that. And by the way, that's exactly what we want from the machines, particularly the machines that we're used to today, whether it's flying airplanes, even self-driving cars, wash machines and things like that, calculators. We want them to do exactly one thing and execute very deterministically on orders. We don't want them to be fuzzy. So machines, again, back to the book, the deductive logic has its limits, but it was a good base for the scientific revolution, of course, starting with the Principia Mathematica by Newton, and then Descartes, and Leibniz's contributions to calculus and mathematics, and from there on Boole's mathematics, of course, very important for logic, and then the logic as a field itself, which sort of peaked in the early 20th century, and then was taken over by more advanced applications, or what we call computer science today. Turing and von Neumann started that field. But so we transition now from deductive logic to Bayesian inference. What is Bayesian inference? That is That is, it's a statistical decision-making process where you start with priors and then you adjust your probabilities of something happening based on new information. That's roughly what Bayesian inference is. The problems there is, of course, how do you start with the priors? What kind of priors do you start? And you can use actually deductive logic for that. So you could say, well, I'm going to, logically determine. I can determine logically that, swimming in the ocean is not the same thing like walking on a field or something like that. I mean, I can start with priors that are logically derived and then go from there and use statistical information to start adapting those priors. Now that leads us to the third big revolution, which is, of course, the data-driven neural net type of revolution, where we start with data. So we start with or without priors. Let's say we just start with something, and then we feed the model data, and the model then determines probabilistically, or with what's called the maximum likelihood method, where the particular input belongs in the big distribution of the database that we built, or the model. So the model is kind of like a compressed database of knowledge expressed in latent space through actual vectors, and then those vectors can be compared to the input through a similarity measure, like cosine distance, for example, and then you can output certain answers to questions. For example, which movie do you recommend? Or drive me from here to there, which is the same thing. You're predicting the next move, predicting the next word in large language models. So that's kind of the history of the science itself. I think some of the big takeaways I took from the books, things that I didn't know. For example, the whole history of cognitive science, when there was a pivotal moment in the 60s and 70s, when cognitive science started to conjecture that our thoughts and categories, particularly our categories, so the way we think about the world, is actually influenced by our sensory system and our constrained computational abilities. So that's, I think, an interesting take on the way our brains evolved. Maybe it sounds obvious now, but so there's no a priori way of thinking. That's what this really means. There's no Platonic way of thinking. There's no right way of thinking. There is a way of thinking, or a way of making decisions in the real world, and that way is influenced by the cognitive abilities of the system, in our case, our brain, and our sensory system, our energy household, our biological lifetime. It's different if we live 10 years or 100 years. It changes the way we evolve. It changes our priorities. So a lot of the categories that we build are driven by the constraints that we have computationally and sensor-wise. I think that's, I would say, probably the biggest takeaway I took from the book, that even happened in cognitive science. I think that's very important, and it leads you leads me to the conclusion that we are now at a point also where we de-anthropomorphize intelligence, because we don't have to actually build systems with the constraints of humans. So the idea that we want to build a system that has the ability of a human brain, actually, it's the wrong problem. It's a nice science project, and I'm sure it can get people careers at university, but it's not interesting from an engineering perspective or a business perspective. I think building industrial scale intelligence is much more interesting, because we can then create many more new types of intelligences and knowledge that can get us to Mars and interplanetary, for example, things like that our human brain just hasn't evolved to. Like I just saw this is as a side note, I saw a presentation yesterday by a physicist who basically wants to verbally, anecdotally prove that we can never go to Mars. And that's a very typical limitation by human brain, also because of vanity, of course, and in that case, I would say also political bias against Elon Musk, that, why would you say something like that as an accomplished scientist? You should know better that that every conjecture can be falsified, and if in principle it can be falsified, and you shouldn't make statements like, well, we'll never go here or there, never do this or that. You should say, these are the problems, and I don't have solutions, so please work on those solutions, which is very useful. And he didn't do that, though. But my point is, vanity and human bias and things like career perspectives and all that kind of stuff comes into play when we talk about science. And the human intelligence, the machine intelligence, the industrial scale intelligence that we're building, hopefully building right now and going to continue building, is going to have different constraints, but not those types of constraints. So that leads me to another big conclusion of the book, and that actually goes back to the name of the book, the laws of thought. I think the laws of thought, it's the wrong question to ask. What are the laws of thought? The right question to ask is, if intelligence is the computational part of achieving goals, then the question is, how can we get more computation, more computation? And the other is, how can we define what are goals? What does that even mean, setting goals? And I think that, to me, is the biggest takeaway of the book, that I got inspired while reading the book. Tom actually doesn't talk about it, and I don't want to hold it against him, actually. I want to cherish the inspiration that he gave me. Through the lecture of his book, I actually came up with this thought. I mean, this is inspired by Richard Sutton, but again, I had to read Sutton and this book to get to a conclusion. And the conclusion is that I think we should start talking more about goals. What does that actually mean to pursue goals? And what are good goals? What are bad goals? Because the way we see it now, this is our view at Orange Capital Partners, inspired by Richard Sutton, The Bitter Lesson, The Era of Experience, also inspired by what SpaceX is doing, SpaceX being the combination of X, SpaceX, and Tesla. We consider that one company at this point. So the idea to generate orders of magnitude more power and then fuel intelligence and bring intelligence to bear that way. The questions that come up, of course, is first, do we even need that much power? What are we going to do with all that intelligence? And the answer is, we're going to create new knowledge. The demand for intelligence is infinite, because when we, and this is based on epistemological ideas, such as, for example, Karl Popper's idea of intelligence, or knowledge, actually, knowledge, which is that you will never actually achieve absolute truth with knowledge and science, but you will approximate the truth by bringing solutions to problems that are better than the existing solutions. And that way you will create new problems. By definition, that's how science works. That's how knowledge creation works. Every time you create new knowledge, you create new problems that require even more. So it's an avalanche of ideas and intelligence and knowledge, and it keeps growing. And the more energy we have, the more we can do. So, for example, when humanity discovered oil, which was a problem in itself, how to actually discover oil. So it was discovered, let's say it was serendipity, and then how to pump oil and create an oil industry required new knowledge. For example, how to use kerosene, how to create kerosene to light lamps, and then next how to create an internal combustion engine to use oil and gasoline for transportation. When humanity decided to go electric with transportation, the problem of how to use lithium and cobalt and nickel to create batteries, and then how to make better batteries, how to make them at scale, the whole question of how to produce things economically comes up. So there's a lot of knowledge that needs to be created every time new knowledge is being built, and it's driven by goals. So that's the key takeaway, is really the idea of how can we better define goals? What is it that we are looking for when we talk about goals? So in other words, a goal is, what does that even mean? In our essay, what if AI proves the Riemann hypothesis and nobody looks? In that essay, we talk about this specifically, and the conclusion is the goal is driven by, or the decision whether a goal is a good goal or a bad goal is going to be driven by economic decisions. So monetizable goals are good goals. They will prevail in the long run. They will prevail, and that's what our brief history of capitalism has shown us, or free market economics. As much as we have it, we have a system that has marketplace, that actually has the ability to replace existing structures with new structures, better structures, which is what we call a marketplace. So that will decide also what goals are good goals and bad goals. So we also spoke about the CEO economy. So individuals, humans, become arbiters of or decision makers, in a sense that everybody's now becoming a CEO of their own little company and allocating AI labor to that company. And then, of course, success and failure will be decided in the marketplace. So that's roughly the way we see the future of labor. And this brings us back to the book and the idea that for the next phases of intelligence, the interesting questions from our perspective, and Tom actually ends the book with what are the next questions. Now, we would add that if intelligence is the computational part of the ability to achieve goals, then we want to think a bit more harder about what it means to set goals, and how do we decide what is a good goal and a bad goal, and then in that same realm also, of course, think about the actual ultimate goal to pursue, which is how do we create more intelligence, and that is where SpaceX comes into play, and this is how we sort of draw the whole circle back to Orange Capital Partners, Our large position in Tesla is driven by the idea that we can build industrial scale AI at much, much bigger scales than we have today. And the main driver of that is going to be setting the right goals. And for example, space-based AI data centers is a fantastic goal because it solves the problem of energy, and it also creates a monetizable goal, assuming that we can use that intelligence profitably on Earth. And we believe we can, because we have, like say within Tesla, we have the robotaxi network, the cybercab network, and then eventually the Optimus network. Sending humans to Mars is virtually impossible today because of radiation. So what we can do is, at least for the base on Mars, it can be built by Optimus robots. The humans still have to fly there, and that's a problem, but at least we can solve the problem of once they're there, they can already enter a perfectly shielded cabin or space station that is protected from radiation. So those are the kinds of things that can be done with Optimus. So those are good goals because they're monetizable. I think humanity will find ways to pay for these things, because they will be, if nothing, they will get us ahead in the Department of War, or in that department, and that is, like it or not, one of the biggest drivers of economic progress has always been the fighting of wars and also the prevention of wars. Now we're in the camp that technological deterrence is the best way to prevent wars, and therefore investing in advanced technologies and intelligence to actually increase our war fighting capabilities will be the most potent economic driver for intelligence, and space exploration is going to be part of that. So to summarize, now I've made quite a bit of maybe I went a little bit too far out of the actual topic of the book, but this is a testament to the quality of the book. It's an inspiring book. I think Tom did a good job, and I thank him for that. The book itself, The Laws of Thought, is a history of cognitive science. It's a history of how people think about intelligence. They started with logic, then they introduced probabilities and Bayesian reasoning, and then they went from that to large-scale probabilistic reasoning based on maximum likelihood methods, which were enabled through high availability of data and compute. That's where we stand today. I think the future is the era of experience. This is not in the book. This is now our conclusion. So we're going from human-derived data and human-based intelligence architectures to industrial scale intelligence architectures where data is generated through industrial scale, also in the virtual world, so through world models, and then also the kinds of problems that we are solving with intelligence will increasingly be problems that humans would never have been able to solve with their biological intelligence. So similarly, like the analogy of flight, right? I mean, a biological flying machine would never be able to become Starship. Now we're building a system like that, and that is human ingenuity in engineering. That's what it means. So we think that we are actually right now at the crossroads of de-anthropomorphizing intelligence, and that is the main reason why we're invested in Tesla and NVIDIA, because those will be the main driving companies for that process. Thank you.